Hello everyone and welcome to the University of Arts London College of Fashion 2024 Fashion Business School Postgraduate podcast sessions. These series of panel discussions have been driven and influenced by the exciting and topical fashion industry related subjects researched and delivered by our postgraduate master's programme students for their final projects. They cover current and relevant themes shaping the wider fashion industry, such as sustainable practice, the use of AI and XR technologies, and also inclusivity. We hope that you enjoy these session discussions and thank you for listening.
Welcome to this podcast about AI and technology topics for the fashion industry. My name is Janani Langford and I'm the course leader of the MA Fashion Design Management course at London College of Fashion. And I'm joined by our three talented master students from the Fashion Business School. So I would love you to introduce yourself by telling us your name and what course you have been studying.
I am Prerna and I have been studying MA Strategic Fashion Marketing.
My name's Lucy and I studied the Applied Psychology of Fashion course.
And I'm Janani and I studied the Fashion Design Management course.
Brilliant. Thank you so much and welcome. You have all handed in your master's project here in September, and the three of you have explored different aspects of how AI and technology might impact the fashion industry. You've spent several months researching key literature within this topic, and then you found a gap that you've explored in more depth. And I'm very excited to learn from you today about your main insights from doing this research of how AI and technology will shape and disrupt the industry. So shall we start with just a kind of a short summary of the topic and the approach you took? So Lucy, would you like to start?
Yeah, no worries. So for my project, I sort of looked at personalization in e-commerce. I partnered with an Australian brand called Venroy. They sort of came to me with a broad issue, so to say, that they wanted to do something different on their website, but they weren't really sure what they wanted to do or how they wanted to do it. So I went away and with my supervisor decided to look into the topic of digital nudging, which is basically using psychology to implement different sort of cues on a website that encourage or guide user behavior. So in this instance, I guess it would be encouraging somebody to make a purchase on a clothing brand's website. But then a lot of the research that had been done on that I found, it was done quite a while ago and it was all really positive and really effective. So I hadn't been a huge amount of research since. And then I thought I could pair that with generative AI in the form of a virtual stylist. So the sort of digital nudges would be implemented through the stylist. And I wanted to see if that would make them more effective. Is essentially what I did. So I sort of did pilot testing for this idea for their website.
Amazing.
Yeah, thank you.
Brilliant. Prerna, would you like to continue?
Yeah, sure. So my topic was how phygital brand experiences, and when I say phygital, I mean the blending of digital and physical elements in a retail space. So that could be virtual try-ons or RFID tags and things like that. How that affects emotional responses among Gen Z consumers and whether or not that leads to brand loyalty in the long term. And my study was based in India. So I did a participant study with Gen Z consumers in India, and why that was so relevant for me was because India is such a booming luxury market at this point. It's going to be about $200 billion by 2030. So and Gen Z is one of the largest contributors to that market. So it was very interesting to understand how they react to certain experiences when it comes to technological adoption in the industry. There was a lot of studies that were done and a lot of research done on how the functional aspects of technology in retail are utilized, whether it is, does the technology work? Is it efficient? But there's been very little research on the emotional aspects, how it makes you feel. And I think that's something that's very crucial when it comes to building a long-term brand relationship, especially with Gen Z having such short attention spans.
Yeah.
So unless and until you have that emotional connection to a brand, it's like you're not going to go back to it, because there's so much distraction in terms of the marketing and the kind of information that we get from social media and everything. So yeah, that's one of the key reasons why I took up this topic.
Brilliant, amazing. Sounds great. Janani, would you like to share your research?
So my research was a practice-based exploration of generative parametric design methodologies for contemporary footwear. So parametrics is algorithm-driven modeling based on parameters set up by the designer and boundaries set up by the designer. That's commonly used in architecture and engineering, but was increasing adoption in fashion. And when it came to looking at the design and development, and especially in contemporary contexts where you're not necessarily using it to do the most efficient thing, I was interested in exploring how that sort of co-designing relationship worked. And because AI is so new, I wanted to have a sort of in situ, or be able to research people who have used it in situ in a corporate context, so we could potentially speculate on how that would go with more like AI technologies utilized in the design and development process specifically.
Yeah, amazing. And maybe would you like to share what a practice-based project is, maybe, because it's slightly different maybe in the approach.
Yeah, so the practice-based it still requires a lot of theoretical rigor, and you use the sort of theory to build what will inform your practice. So for mine, I researched a lot into parametrics and how that may affect the aesthetics of something, or how it interacts with different existing workflows. And then I utilized that to create a framework for designers to co-design with that generative methodology, which I then used and tested with the industry on how that worked and if the speculations in my paper were correct or incorrect, or what that could tell us about designing in the future with generative technology.
Brilliant. Thank you, all of you, for sharing that. And you touched a little bit about how important AI is and will be in the future, but maybe could you share with us why is your topics, what's the kind of potential of it? Why it's so important for researching in the context that you've been researching? Who'd like to start?
I can start.
Yeah, you can
so as I mentioned earlier, because there's little research in terms of the emotional aspect of digital experiences in particular, and especially when it comes to an emerging market like India. Also it was also very important to look at the cultural nuances that affect how a consumer reacts to a particular technology, because how, say, a Gen Z consumer would react to a particular technology in London wouldn't be the same as something in New Delhi, right? So that was very important, and I feel like there was a lot of gap in terms of, so there's research on technology in the retail space, and then there's research on the e-commerce space, but bringing it together and how, because today stores are looking at how they can integrate apps, how they can integrate click and collect services, how they can integrate, RFID tags, all of it together in one space. So how does it make a consumer feel when they're going through that customer journey is something which, so bringing that whole aspect together and what the emotional responses that generates was something I feel like is a gap that needed to be filled. And also, apart from having the technology aspect, it was also important to look at how there's a balance that needs to be brought in terms of technology and the human aspect, because when we're talking about luxury, it's also about the personalized experiences that we're looking at. It's not you can't just throw technology everywhere and expect it to work.
No,
so that's something that I really found interesting when I was researching, and the kind of reactions I got from the participants.
That's really interesting. I like that. I think it's really interesting with the human aspect. And, there are so many great technological developments, but actually, we have to make sense of them and see how they make a difference. Yeah.
Because essentially today we are, we're all connected on technology so much, but we're digital natives, but we're actually craving human physical experiences all the time. Yeah. So that's something I found out in the study, and that was very interesting.
Amazing.
Yeah.
And Lucy, what about you?
So I think you touched on it briefly earlier about like it's e-commerce or fashion e-commerce, is such an oversaturated market at the moment. Like there's so many choices for consumers, particularly Gen Z, who are the most online. So fostering that emotional connection with a brand, I think, is key to creating brand loyalty and having those consumers returning to your brand over and over again. Personalization, we know it is so important in fashion e-commerce. I think there was a McKinsey report, which this was done about a year ago now, but they found that brands that really excel, or fashion brands that really excel at personalization, their revenue is up about 40% compared to brands who sort of maybe don't do it as well or just disregard it altogether. So I knew that was an area I wanted to look at for Venro's website, is how can we increase personalization and digital nudging. There's lots of research, particularly in other sectors like medical sectors or even government, which the ethics of that can be questioned a little bit. But there's lots of research out there, but I couldn't find any research that looked at how our new technology, which has obviously just boomed in the last sort of 5-10 years, such as AI, generative AI, could be used hand in hand with digital nudges to make them more personalized and make them more effective, and ultimately increase that emotional connection with the brand, because consumers feel like they're getting that personalization that we all desire these days, and I think expect more so from brands as well. And then I know you just touched on the human point as well, which is sort of what my research did a little bit. I compared like an AI virtual stylist with a human AI stylist, or hypothetically, I did a vignette study, which is a hypothetical situation, as I didn't have the capabilities to build an AI in my 12-week master's project. Exactly. So in this like hypothetical situation, we did find that people, whilst AI is effective at increasing purchase intention, the variables of brand engagement and consumer satisfaction were much higher when it was a human stylist. Ultimately, sort of my recommendations, the hybrid approach is best. So like you can use this technology, but you need that human touch still somewhere in there for people to really feel that emotional connection to a brand. Yeah.
Amazing.
I guess, jumping off the human touch, I was sort of interested in my project just with all the sort of rhetoric around AI and AI technology and creative jobs. And I think it was Mira Murati of OpenAI who kind of casually said like, oh, well, like some creative jobs may go away, but maybe they shouldn't have been there in the first place. And I felt like that was sort of an observation, maybe siloed in the world of like technology and STEM, but when it comes to a creative industry, I don't think things are that simple. And so I was curious in looking at like, designers have designed with technology all the time. We use Adobe. So what is so different about generative technology, and how would that change the way we design? And like how does designing change when you're only designing on a computer and you're not holding anything in your hand? Does that change anything? And should we accommodate for that? Do things tend to look a certain way because we're now relying completely on technology? And I think especially in the realm of contemporary and luxury fashion, if you're not designing for performance or technical equipment, how do you balance that sort of creative intent with design and generative methodologies?
Amazing.
Can I?
Sorry.
I just find that very interesting, because there's a lot of chatter about how technology is going to replace a lot of these, creative roles and everything. But I don't know to what extent that's true, because at the end of the day, as I view it, it's more like technology in terms of whether it's in terms of retail or in terms of designing or the production process. It's more about enhancing that creativity or that production process or that retail experience rather than replacing it. So we need to, again, as I said, we need to find that balance in terms of where we're looking at balancing technology with the human elements of it.
Absolutely. And using it as a tool, as you said. I think that's really interesting. We've had so many different technological tools. I mean, when I started as a designer, we were drawing everything in hand, like in terms of sketches. And now we just feel like that's so outdated.
Yeah.
But it's
It's interesting because there is a difference with technology. Like technology does enable you to do a lot of different things. If you look at technology that was made in the 70s and 80s with the invention of like plastic and injection molding, and how that's differed with now being able to have like computer aided 3D design and the types of surfacing that are available. So it is interesting to see like where does the human touch sit in that workflow, or how does that change what we're ending out as an output, and what does that mean for fashion, and what does that mean for trends?
Yeah.
Absolutely amazing. I would love you to talk a little bit about the primary research you did, because obviously you can read and you can research what everyone else has done, but you conduct primary research yourself. So maybe you can share a little bit of details of how you conducted your primary research, and perhaps what were your key findings from doing primary research? Should we start the other end this time? Should we say, Janani, would you like to start?
So for primary research, for me, is a little bit of a challenge in which angle to come from, because the technology and the methodologies that I was interested in using weren't used widespread. But that's sort of why I focused my project in footwear. And I'm not just saying this because I'm also a footwear designer, but they tend to be a little bit more technically savvy, and that's probably a cause the shoes having to be this merging of functional and creative. So they do tend to rely on CAD, and that's where I found my majority of my primary pool. So they were people that worked in luxury fashion, or there were people who were like technical designers. I interviewed one designer who started out as an automobile designer before moving into footwear and sort of started up the CAD processes at like a large sports retailer. So I looked to get like a variety of opinion across ages, and sort of like people that had originally done things by hand and were now adopting technology, to people who studied only using technology and never really did anything by hand formally, and sort of to see the differences in their workflows and how they approached using the different programs that I observed.
Lucy?
So I, as I mentioned earlier, partnered with this Australian brand, Venroy. So I sort of came up with this idea or feature for the website, which they are moving ahead with. So I'll sort of keep the intricacies of the idea a bit more like low key for that sake. But it was basically just a feature on the website that would implement both generative AI as a virtual stylist combined with digital nudging techniques, and a few other sort of little features here and there. And like I said, couldn't build it. So I just came up with a sort of hypothetical situation and made mock-ups of what this feature would look like on the website, just like sort of screen grabs of how that would look. And then people just online sort of looked at these things, and they looked at these mock-ups and were told to really immerse themselves in this hypothetical situation, read through about sort of 20 minutes of different scenarios of them using it. And then they had to answer a questionnaire, or lots of different questions related to the metrics of brand engagement, consumer satisfaction, and purchase intention, then answer somewhat of long-winded questions at the end, qualitative research. But what we found was that people do still have a little bit of apprehension towards AI, which was expected in some of the research I was doing earlier. I found that was particularly the case in like medical scenarios. It's less than that, though. I think that what people were saying is that they're a bit more open to it, I think, when the stakes are lower. So situations such as styling, people are less apprehensive towards it, but they still do foster beliefs. I think that technology, it's making the suggestions purely off of things like what the highest stock levels are. So it's trying to push those items, or pushing the items that are the most expensive rather than the cheaper items. So the recommendations that sort of had, and what we found is that it can be implemented and it can be really effective. And obviously the capabilities of AI far outweigh that of a human stylist in regards to response time and immediate access to past purchase history. So the recommendations they make can be supposedly much more efficient than what a human stylist could make at a much larger scale as well. But it's really making sure that it's really transparent about how those recommendations are made. So including statements such as, based on your past purchase history, or like, we know you liked a coat similar to this last year, therefore you'll like the coat this year. And that's what's called, that then relates back to the digital nudging that I mentioned earlier. That's what's called informational provisions. So basically it's providing users with information about their, in this case, their own past history, their own past purchasing decisions, to sort of justify to them, we know you'll like this because you've liked things similar in the past. So it sort of solidifies their trust in that AI system further.
Amazing. Brilliant.
So I did participant observations within a luxury retail setting with Gen Z luxury consumers in India. And right after that observation was an interview, just to, understand what they felt, what was the experience like, and just get more in detail about the emotions and feelings of the entire experience. So the kind of technology I was looking at was more to do with RFID tags. There was the store had digital tablets that you could log into, and then it would sync to the brand app, and then you could obviously get personalized recommendations, and there was virtual styling, and then even the store staff would get notifications based on your personalized app profile, and they could then make certain recommendations to you while you're having your shopping experience. So all of that was great, and what I found was that so it was an interesting mix. So some participants really took the technology really well. They were very, there were emotions of, say, joy or excitement, and they were very. So if something worked well, they got really excited about it, and it really enhanced their shopping experience. So that's when the whole idea of how, technology can help you build that emotional connection with a brand, and then they want to come back and experience more of it comes in. But then there were some participants who were a little more apprehensive to try the technology, because what they said in the interview was that, we're on our phones or on our laptops all day. So when we come into a luxury retail setting, what we want is to switch off. We want to come in and have that experience of someone hand holding us through that customer journey. And I don't want to scan a RFID tag to read about the whole transparency, process. I can do that on a website. I want someone to actually tell me that, oh, this is what the product is made of, or this is where it comes from. And so it was an interesting mix of finding, how people react to the same kind of experience. And and some people just found that initially they were really excited with the whole technology aspect of it, and then slowly they just felt like it was interfering within their shopping experience. So they got a little frustrated. One more thing that was very interesting was the fact that when it is very important for technology to work well in terms of a seamless integration, right? So I did the study over 5 days, and on one of the days, unfortunately, there was some Wi-Fi issue and there were technical glitches, and it just really spoiled the entire experience. What could have been a really great experience for one of the participants really turned into frustration by the end of it, because things just weren't working. So how all of these elements add up in terms of that building that brand relationship, or having that brand image in your head is so interesting to look at.
Definitely.
Yeah.
You just said something as well about how when people go into stores, they're really wanting that like human touch, and they want to switch off almost. I found almost a similar thing, but I guess in the opposite way in my study, that people shopping online, when you want that personalization sort of in the open-ended questions, they were saying, I don't just want to talk to AI, I want to be able to talk to an actual person. So even online, I think people are still craving that level of human connection. And we like included elements of, it's called anthropomorphism. So it's basically when AI is human-like. So in the mock-ups, I really made sure that sort of the scripts that I gave the AI, which differed between the human and AI condition, but even in the AI, whilst they're aware it was AI, it was really human-like in the way, very conversational in their responses and how they responded to questions or how they responded to certain prompts, because previous research has shown so much that it's so much more effective when they do genuinely feel like they're talking to a real person. So it's almost like people are having a bit of we're sort of swimming back around. We used to be so excited about technology and being able to switch offline, and now we're like, no, wait, I want human connection again.
Yeah, no, for sure.
But it's interesting, isn't it, how you can combine it, and how can you maybe do a hybrid version of it, or whichever way you can make it work, but still with some sort of human interaction,
and because
or
people
mimicking.
Still want the immediacy of what technology can bring. So then they're like, well, if you're human, then it's no longer immediate. You need to sort of balance the two as much as you can.
That's really, really interesting. I wonder if there's anything you haven't shared yet about your primary research that you found particularly surprising or interesting, maybe something you didn't expect to, I don't know, to hear from your participants in your interview.
I was surprised with, because I did interview and observe designers from, like very like technical designers, people working in luxury, so a little bit more creative and abstract. And In sort of the theoretical research, a lot of the theory was saying, well, design's a balance, and it's like the designer's intuition that's balancing all these different outputs, like the technical knowledge of how to build something, and also like interpreting trends. And it was interesting that despite the different types of designers or things, they all sort of agreed in their own way, not so outright. But when I asked the question, like, okay, you can now make like 100 outputs in 10 minutes. How do you know which one to pick? Or how do you know when to stop generating outputs? Because you could just keep going forever. And every single one of them basically described that they just knew, or it was like an intuition. They were just like, yeah, I just get a feeling, or there's just a design where I know it fits best. So it was really interesting to see sort of that primary research reflect the secondary research so succinctly and all the way across the board.
Yeah. So again, the human touch and understanding in the design process as well, not only in communication with consumers. Amazing. What were your final recommendations for your master's projects? I know we talked about your primary research, but when you concluded, having done all the research you've done your own primary research, what were your final recommendation, and who will you say that they are most impactful for in the industry? Lucy, shall we start with you?
Yeah, no worries. I think that, the research I did is so applicable to really any fashion brand that wants to make an effort to stand out online. Particularly, I think that over the next sort of 5 to 10 years, we're going to see generative AI become much more, much more like attainable, and affordable, for smaller brands as well. The brand that I worked with is definitely a successful brand in Australia, but it's by no means a big conglomerate. They've still got, budgets, tighter, smaller budgets on their marketing teams, yet they're still able to be putting some money towards and focusing on this. And they partner with a sort of small independent website developer who has a real expertise in generative AI. And even as I was coming up with this idea, I thought it would take like a big team to build. I hadn't really thought about how it would probably work on a tech side of things. But I was chatting to him on the phone the other day, and he's like, I could build that in just a couple of months. So I think it definitely is becoming, so much more attainable for brands. And I think that if you're not implementing it in really effective ways on your website, I think that you will get left behind as a brand. Ultimately, my recommendations for Venro, what they should, with this feature, implement what I said, a hybrid approach. So it mostly is AI, because then you get the full capabilities of it. They can be talking to thousands of different customers at the exact same time, but then have an option to talk to a human stylist for those more complex style queries. An interesting sort of tidbit that I found as well is that people commented who self-identified as having maybe a bit more quirky or out there style, saying, I don't think that this sort of styling feature would be as beneficial for me, as I don't trust that an AI could fully comprehend or understand my style. But then I think that if they did a hybrid approach, so you could then talk to a human stylist to sort of solidify what the AI has recommended, that would then sort of get rid of those apprehensions on both sides of people that are questioning if it's just saying it because there's higher stock of that, or if they're questioning whether that actually matches those pants.
You want to be recommending things because they're right for you, not because that's what's the most
definitely the most lucrative for the business.
Makes sense. Prerna.
So for me, the main recommendation really that I found was that brands, especially luxury brands today, now that they're making their way into the Indian market, need to look at the cultural nuances of how they can integrate that. Because at the end of the day, even if you're looking at Gen Z consumers, of course, they're well-traveled. Of course, they're digital natives, but they still are very much connected to their roots and their culture, and they want that balance. So all of them in their, across the board, all of them in the interviews said that we would want these luxury brands to appreciate our culture and bring those aspects within the technology that they're integrating into the retail experience, so that we feel understood as a consumer as well. So that was one of the main aspects that would then lead to people, they said that we would be more open to sharing these things on social media or having word of mouth marketing if it's more relevant to the space that we live in or the space we consume luxury fashion in. And apart from that, having, of course, that seamless integration of technology without the technical glitches, and having the staff to know when to step in, looking at a a person's body language or their kind of preferences in terms of whether they're comfortable with the technology or whether they need that human interaction is something that is very important, because otherwise a person, you can assume that a person is very technologically savvy, but okay, maybe the Gen Z consumers are, but when we come to an older consumer like millennials or even older than that, everyone goes luxury shopping these days, especially in India, and for a lot of them, they're not very comfortable with technology. So having that assistance readily available, having that kind of those recommendations and that personal touch, and making those magical moments possible within a luxury setting is something that's what I recommended at the end of. I came up with a conceptual framework that spoke about how these phygital brand pillars, really the kind of emotions they evoke, whether they're positive or negative, and then how that leads to brand loyalty in terms of the kind of brand image that is built. And if there's a positive brand image, of course, that leads to then behavioral loyalty development in terms of building a long-term customer relationship, word-of-mouth marketing, and just talking about the brand a lot more.
Brilliant. Thank you.
So similarly, I also created a conceptual framework on sort of how to utilize generative AI in the design and generative methodologies in the design and development process, and doing that in a way that we're building in that sort of designer autonomy and designer validity, but also kind of highlighting the really positive aspects of generative methodologies, such as like the kind of real-time feedback. A lot of the designers I interviewed and observed were able to make changes on the spot with a team maybe outside of design, or the ability to go from idea 3D model to like a physical rapid prototype was super beneficial in their workflow, in the sense that they weren't waiting to sample things from a different country and waiting for that back and forth. So creating a framework that sort of highlighted those sort of aspects while still providing designers with that assurance that you can still be part of this process and it is a co-designing process and you're still in charge of it. And then another big positive was, obviously it's a large technical feat to program something like this, to learn this program. But within my practice, what I did is I just built like a base algorithm, and then I sent off like a mood board, and I made my own interpretation and went through the framework and did all the steps and came up with my own design idea. And I gave that to one of my interviewees who also did the same thing. And we did end up with two different, but I'd say design language and sort of like physically similar products that look like they would be part of the same product range. So if you are a large scale retailer and you want to look back into your archives, or you're designing large ranges, this could be a great way of still, again, providing that designer autonomy, but having it sort of bound in a specific way.
That's so cool. Sorry. I know nothing about the technology or production
very
side
cool.
of things, but that sounds really cool.
And I suppose it's also not letting it run wild, but within those boundaries and within the history of the brand and how that works, and really utilizing the tools, but still having the input. So that's brilliant.
That's amazing.
So I suppose my next question, and might be the last one as well, but what is next for you, and how will your research be useful for you in your whether current or future career? So who'd like to start?
Yeah, I'll start. So as I mentioned earlier, the brand that I partnered with, I think are going to go ahead with this idea, which is really cool and exciting to sort of see something that I came up with, I guess, many months ago now, actually hopefully come to fruition within the next few months. And hopefully I'll sort of work alongside them a little bit to sort of help them bring that idea and totally build it to life. And then ideally I'm hoping to just work with brands sort of on a contract basis, doing similar things where they come to me with a broad idea and then sort of using psychological theories and insights, looking into different topics and coming up with answers or solutions to problems that they might not even necessarily be able to identify or word themselves yet. They just know that they want to change up something. They're not sure what they want to do or how they want to do it. I think I really like the freedom of that. And then still being able to use science to back up the solutions, I find really exciting. So hopefully just do more of that.
Amazing. I think that's a common thing, isn't it? It's about problems or challenges and finding solutions for them. So definitely. I think you've all tackled that, like different aspects of that. So sorry, go on, Prerna.
No, for me, I think I just want to work now as within the luxury space as maybe a brand manager or just to understand, especially in emerging markets, to understand how we can bring that technology adoption, because emerging markets are at a nascent stage of technology integration at this point, especially when it comes to, like, because my study was based in India, I can talk about that. It's at a very, very, initial stage of getting technology into the market in the retail space. And there's a lot of hand-holding that is still required when it comes to the consumers. So how to integrate that technology, how to make consumers feel more comfortable with that technology, that's something I really want to work on in the coming future, because technological adoption is so fast. There's so much happening so rapidly. How much of it is actually possible for consumers to take in, and how much of it would actually be effective in a particular market? That's something that I want to look into.
Yeah. Janani?
So in my current practice, what I do is tend to go into a lot of brands that don't have an in-house design team or accessories team and go in there. And so I've been able to sort of start up digital workflows or digitizing brands' assets. So I'd love to continue that on. And I'm always keeping an eye out on technology. And I'm starting to also consult for a couple of technology companies that are looking to work in the fashion space and sort of explaining the nuances behind that, because there's so many times I've consulted on something and they're like, what do you mean, like, there's no science behind trend direction? Like, how do you know a product's going to make money? And I was like, I don't. That's the whole thing about this industry. It's all built off vibes.
It's every supper party's question, isn't it?
So that's kind of like in the sphere I'd like to stay in as well.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for sharing. And it's been really interesting to hear about your research. Maybe my final question will then be if you have any recommendations for current or future students if they want to look into AI and technology developments. So as a research topic, do you have any advice on how to approach it, where to start, where to get over the hurdle of first getting your head around it? I don't know. What would you have liked to have had as an advice? Yeah.
I think I'd just say that when I first started up looking at this topic, I was purely focused on digital nudging. And then I sort of thought of how I could use AI. But I come from zero tech background. I came from a psychology background into this fashion course. That you don't need to come from a tech background to be able to research it. I mean, my study was purely hypothetical. I literally wrote up scenarios, came up with a mock-up of what this idea could look like, discussing, with somebody who does have a bit more of an understanding of how AI actually works to make sure that it was an idea that could actually work with the current technology that we have. But you don't need to fully understand how the coding would work necessarily to be able to research it, particularly at a master's level course. You can be hypothetical in nature, so just sort of get going with it. And there's so much out there that's really palatable and easy to digest, to explain it on very simplistic terms. Would be my...
Yeah, I mean, adding to that's exactly the initial apprehension that I had, that, I'm not like so well versed with the technology aspect of things.
100%.
So, but because my study was based more on consumer behavior, it doesn't have to be that you need to focus or be scared of, because technology can be scary sometimes, because the newer the technology is, there's so little that you know about it. But of course, read up on it, get your mentors or your supervisors to help you with it. But I think it's more about focusing on what you want to look at. But if it's consumer behavior, then you don't really need to know those technical aspects. All you need to know is how that is how technology is assisting you with that whole emotional aspect of the feelings and the thoughts and the emotions of the consumer. So just don't let it scare you is the only thing.
That's very good advice. I had an old tutor when I was studying my MA that said it was the same thing when they had the internet, and they said we don't need to know how the internet works to use it and to understand the potential
100%.
of it. Janani,
especially for me doing such a technical based project, it is making sure you're breaking down and condensing things, because like this project wasn't about how parametrics worked, but I still had to introduce to a reader who may not know what that is, how that works in the grand scheme of things. But I would also say to look at things in situ. I think technology is changing so quickly, and there's a new tool coming out literally every other week. So it's important that you're looking at things in the context of fashion, because you're never designing in a vacuum. You're never, like, marketing doesn't work in a vacuum. Everything's this sort of big conjoined cycle. So it's important to look at technology from that lens. And I would say if you're doing a practice-based one, you're going to learn something new. You're going to do something new. Your practice is going to change, but do that within your limits. So I came from an industrial architecture background, so I knew how to parametrically model. So that wasn't going to be a hindrance to my thing. But my practice did change, and obviously I created this new workflow. So it's, I think, balancing those kinds of things.
Amazing. It's been super interesting to hear about your research. And I think what we touched on in terms of AI and technology, whether we are from applied psychology, we are from fashion marketing or fashion design management, is that it's all about the human connection, touch, intervention, understanding. And I think that's been really, really interesting how we can, use these opportunities as tools, but still, making sure maybe even more that there is that human aspect of it. So thank you so much. It was a pleasure.
Thank you.
Thank you.